Sindh as a region of the Indian subcontinent holds an important place because it is here that the Arabs established their foothold for the first time in the Indian subcontinent. But in this video, we will not talk about the Arab conquest of Sindh. We will talk about what was going on in Sindh before the coming of the Arabs. Compared to the history of ancient Sindh, where we do not have any direct source about this region, this period is somewhat different because we do have sources. For example, the famous Chachnama, which we all know about. Then the Chinese traveler Xuanzang has also written about Sindh during this period. And finally, we have the Arab accounts that talk about the region of Sindh before or immediately after the Arab conquest. So because of these sources, we can say that this period is much more friendlier to historical research. But having said that, these sources have their own problem. If we talk about our main source to know about the history of Sindh immediately before the Arab conquest, mainly we have the famous Chachnama, and there is also another text called Tuhfatul Kiram. Now, both of these texts are not contemporary text. If we talk about Chachnama, it was written by someone called Ali Kufi in the 13th century. So this is not a contemporary source. Although Ali Kufi tells us that this text is a Persian translation of an original Arab work, but we should be skeptical of this claim because there are many internal inconsistencies within the Chachnama. If we talk about the second source, Tuhfatul Kiram, it was written in the 18th century, some 1000 years after the Arab conquest. So this is clearly not a contemporary source. So because of these limitations, it should be kept in mind that historians, when they are drawing the narratives from these two sources, their claim are not that robust because our sources are not very credible, so to say. So having talked about the limitations of these sources, let's see what they tell us about the dynasties that ruled Sindh. These sources mentions two dynasties. The first and the older dynasty was the Rai Dynasty or the dynasty of the Rayas. We learn of 5 rulers who belonged to this dynasty. First was Rai Divaji, second was Rai Sahiras, then came Rai Sahasi, then Rai Sahiras second, and finally we have Rai Sahasi second. Out of these 5 names, the first 3 appears in the 18th century work Tuhfatul Kiram. According to historian S.C. Hodiwala, these names are probably corruption of Sanskrit names. For example, Divaji probably means Devaditya, or Sahiras means Shrihars, and Sahasi could be Simhasen. Now both these texts tell us that the first dynasty was replaced by the second dynasty that was founded by someone called Chach. After Chach, his brother Chandar ruled, and finally we have Dahir, who was the son of Chach. So these two dynasties are mentioned in both Tuhfatul Kiram and the famous Chachnama. If we start with the dynasty of the Rayas, the first name which we know of is Divaji. As we have seen, Chachnama does not mention the name of Divaji. It is in Tuhfatul Kiram, the 18th century work, we find the mention of his name. Most historians believe that he ruled probably at the end of 5th century AD. Although when we read Tuhfatul Kiram, it does not appear that he was the founder of his dynasty. So this means that there were some other rulers who came before him that we do not know of. But there is one detail which could be of use to us. The great Arab historian Al-Tabri tells us that an Indian princess was married to the Sasanian king Bahram V, who ruled between 421 AD to 438 AD. Now you might be wondering, how can I use this fact and connect it to the history of Sindh before the reign of Divaji? If we look at Al-Tabri's account, he tells us that the port of Debal and the adjacent territories were given to Sasanians by the Indian king as a dowry of this marriage. And we all know that the port of Debal was under the rulership of the king of Sindh. Now there is also some caution which we have to apply here, because Al-Tabri is the only source that mentions this marriage. So it could be the case that this may not have happened. Now, since we have talked about the port of Debal and the fact that it was part of Sindh's territory, let's see what were the regions that constituted the kingdom of Sindh. So if we look at Chachnama, it tells us that the boundary of Sindh extended up to Kashmir in the east. On the west, it extended up to Makaran. In the south, to the coast, and in north, to the Kurdan and Kikanan mountain ranges. Interestingly, in Tufatul Kiram, the kingdom's territory is even more bigger. And we are told that in the east, it bordered Kannauj. And in the west, it extended up to the Sea of Oman. Also, both Chachnama and Tufatul Kiram does not mention anything about the origin of these rayas or who these rayas were. But there is one important detail in Chachnama that can be of use to us. In Chachnama, we are told that when the last ruler of this dynasty, Rai Sahiras II, was replaced by Chach, a king of Jitor attacks. Here, the term which is used in Chachnama is Jitor, which clearly means Chittor. And this king tells to Chach that he is the brother of Rai Sahiras and he has come to take his kingdom back. This shows that there was some relation between the Rais of Sindh and the king of Chittor. Now, what happened during the reign of Rai Divaji? We do not have any information. The same is also true about the second and the third ruler of this dynasty. But about the fourth ruler, Rai Sahiras II, we know from Chachnama that he appointed 4 governors in his kingdom. These governors ruled 4 different provinces, whereas the capital Alor and the regions around it were controlled by the king himself. These 4 governors, which Rai Sahiras II appointed, were probably his relatives. And Chachnama also tells us about how his reign came to an end. And we are told, all of a sudden an army of the king of Nimruz made an invasion on his country and entered Kirman. When King Sahiras got this news, he issued from the fort of Alor with his main army. Chachnama then goes on to tell us how these 2 armies fought. Rai Sahiras II continued to fight even after most of his army had fled. And in the end, he died fighting. Now, from this narrative, we would assume that after the death of Rai Sahiras II, the king of Nimruz would advance to the capital Alor, or he would at least invade deep into Sindh. But this did not happen. Chachnama simply tells us that the king of Nimruz decided to return to Nimruz. And in the capital Alor, the son of Sahiras II, Sahiras II, became the next king. Now, this simple narrative of Chachnama does not make any sense. Why would this king of Nimruz will fight a battle only to return? And since the king of Sindh had died in the battle, he had all of the opportunity to not only invade Sindh, but also conquer a large chunk of Sindhian territory. But this is not what he does. He simply returns. Because of this, some scholars have argued that the army that had fought the battle with the king of Nimruz was the advance contingent of the Sindhian army. This makes sense because it would be hard for us to imagine that the king of Sindh would be able to mobilize his entire army from the 4 different provinces in just a short period of time. Thus, it is highly likely that the army which King Sahiras II had led was the advance contingent of the Sindhian forces. The main army most probably was led by his son, and it was following some days behind. Now, this also explains why this king of Nimruz did not advance further into Sindh, because he had gathered the news that the main Sindhian army was following the advance contingent, and if he advanced further into Sindh, he would have to fight the main army. So we have discussed about what happened in this battle. But what about this king of Nimruz? Who was he? And when this battle happened? So if we are to read the work of historian H.T. Lambert, he argues that traditionally Nimruz refers to the region of Sijistan, and during the Sasanian rule it was under a Sasanian satrap. H.T. Lambert argues that this battle must have taken place during the reign of Hormuzd IV or Khuhro Parvez, which means between 579 and 592 AD. During this time, the Sasanian Empire was in a state of anarchy. So it is quite possible that this satrap of Sijistan or Nimruz tried to become independent and conquer some territory in the east. In this attempt, he failed miserably, as the narrative of Chachnama shows us. Now, this neat and clean narrative of Chachnama has a problem, and this problem comes from Arab sources. In some Arab sources, they talk about the early Arab incursions into Sindh. This is the period before the coming of Muhammad bin Qasim. And there they mention a battle, the Battle of the River. About this battle, we are told that during the reign of the third Caliph Umar, an Arab army under the leadership of Abdullah bin Abdullah invaded Makran. And in a night attack on the Sindhian forces, they were able to successfully kill the king of Sindh. After this successful victory over the Sindhian forces, Abdullah bin Abdullah asked the permission of the Caliph to advance further into Sindh. But we are told that the Caliph Umar refused. The reason of this refusal was that Caliph Umar had gathered information that the climate of Sindh was not favorable. That is why he did not order Abdullah bin Abdullah to advance further into Sindh. Now you can see we have a problem. On the one hand, we have the narrative of Chachnama, where a king of Nimruz attacks, and during the battle, the king of Sindh dies. On the other hand, we have these Arab sources where an Arab army attacks, and in a night attack, they were able to successfully kill the king of Sindh. So the question for us is that which of these two sources is true? Whether we are to believe Chachnama or the Arab sources are telling us the truth? Or can we say that both of these sources are mentioning historical details, which would mean that two Sindhian kings died fighting two foreign armies? If you ask me, I believe that the narrative of Chachnama is closer to the truth. The reason being that the Battle of the River, which is what these Arab sources call the battle between the Arab forces and the Sindhian army, where the king of Sindh is killed, does not find any mention in one of the earliest surviving Arab chronicle, Futuhu al-Baldan, written by the famous historian Al-Baladhuri. If this Battle of the River actually happened, then Al-Baladhuri would have surely mentioned it, because as we can see, in this battle, a king of Sindh had died. This was an important detail or significant detail for Baladhuri. He would not have missed it. So the fact that Al-Baladhuri, who had written the earliest surviving accounts of Arab conquest, does not mention this whole battle means that this whole narrative is probably based on the Chachnama. So now we come to the reign of Rai Sahiras II. He was the last ruler of this dynasty. About him we will talk in this video, which would be uploaded soon. And if you want to know about the history of ancient Sindh, do watch this video, where I have talked about the history of this region from the earliest known sources, which are the epics, particularly the Mahabharata. If you like this channel, do subscribe, and please do not forget to like this video. Thank you for watching.